have two grown children now who work, one works PR for the Dodgers and one is in public relations for Southern California Edison. And of course, everywhere they go, the name is Rawich, and so they run into someone who either worked with my husband, who was an editor with the Times for, I don't know how many years. He worked for the Times for 30 years. Or someone who had me. And most recently, the one who's Josh, who's the kid who works for the Dodgers, somebody said, Rawich, are you related to Cynthia Rawich? And he said, yes, she's my mother. And he said, the other person said, do you know how tough she was a professor? And he said, do you know how tough she was as a mother? So it was basically the same set of standards. It was the 10 best years of my life, the years that I published the student newspaper. I loved almost every minute of it, the highs, the lows, the great students, the not so good students, the relationship with the editors. It is this group that you have in here will become lifelong acquaintances, if not close friends. Some of you will marry, others of you. There are any numbers of Sundial marriages. There are now, God help us, several children who are coming to see Sun as a result of people who married when they were in my years. And we could tell you all the stories about where exactly these babies were conceived, but I'm going to let it go at that. By the way, this entire conversation is off the record. You can tape me, but we can't use this for Sundial stories, right? We're not going to go nosing around campus based on this. If you want to see me in those years, if you go into the newsroom and that long hallway on the left wall, you will see me get older and fatter with each picture. Started out young, dark hair, thin, and by the end, whole different person. So I kind of, every time I walk through the newsroom, I have to laugh. It was a long, long time ago. My current office, and some of you will eventually wind up there, not because you're bad, where students who have problems wind up in my office all the time because you want to interview me about something, and that's fine, by the way. You'll see is filled with Sundial memorabilia. There's pictures of my children, especially my grandchildren, but most importantly, all the Sundial memorabilia. A giant aspirin plaque that somebody gave me on a particularly bad semester. A poem about the Sundial. A giant cigarette stands in the corner. It was the year I stopped smoking, and the entire staff gave me that as a remembrance of the year I stopped smoking. It has the date and all their names on it. And of course, 19 bound volumes of representing the 10 years that I was the publisher of the paper, minus the one semester where I didn't do it because I had to finish my dissertation or I wasn't going to get tenure at this university. So it's a room full of the best things that happened to me at this university, and that is always, always part of what I feel toward the Daily Sundial. I have to thank Melissa for inviting me, because whether or not I wow you or you all go to sleep, I had a ball on Wednesday and Thursday going through my 19 bound volumes to try to remember some of the big stories and what we did and what the students did, and it was great fun. It was also filthy. Old ink all over me. I'm walking around the office like this. The phone would ring and I didn't know how to pick it up. But I had great fun doing it, and one of the funniest things I found, just because I was leafing through it, it was a little picture, and it was a picture of the head of plant operations on campus maybe 22 years ago. Picture of him, and he's standing talking to somebody. I said, that guy looks familiar. And I look down and it says, Marty Holtzman talking to California State Employees Association Representative Tony Villar. Anybody know who he is? Yeah, Tony Villaraigosa. He's gorgeous. 22 years ago, I have to tell you. So I got a real kick, and I was running around the office showing it to everybody. I don't even remember that, but it was, who would have? He was just somebody who was on campus talking about union issues. So I had great fun. I hope you enjoy this. Please interrupt me with questions or comments or concerns, and I will give you time for questions at the end if there are any. What I think you should know about the Daily Sundial is, number one, it is one of fewer than 100 daily student newspapers in the United States. That is college or university-based, daily being 4 times a week or more publications, considered a daily. There are a handful that are 5 times a week publication. The Harvard Crimson would be a good example of that. My guess is, much like newspapers in the United States are now decreasing their days of publication, I'm guessing that places like the Harvard Crimson and University of Missouri will be decreasing the days of publication of their newspapers as well. I hope. So far that isn't true of the Daily Sundial, but it is considered one of the few weeklies, few daily papers in the United States, and that makes it a very prestigious group of people you're with. They're the famous newspapers in the United States. Here's a tidbit of information you're going to struggle with, and you probably won't even believe it, but it's true. All of our university presidents have believed in the First Amendment and student-free press rights. I'll repeat that for you. All of our presidents have believed, and the current one still does believe, in First Amendment and particularly in student press rights. Doesn't mean they have to make it easy for you to do your jobs. I mean, they don't like the story that you're doing, but they will defend to their death your right to do that job, and they will defend it with time, with money, and with attorneys. And I will tell you a story about the when I was supposed to go to jail for refusing to turn over pictures that the Sundial had shot and that the state of California wanted. They occasionally forget they're in favor of the First Amendment for a minute or two when you're coming at them, but they actually are. I've worked under 3 presidents, President Cleary, President Wilson, and now President Kester, and all 3, it is true of all 3, and the 6 or 7 deans, the deans that oversee the college in which the Department of Journalism resides, all have been First Amendment advocates and have been big defenders of the student newspaper, and it has not always been a defensible publication, I might add. The department's support goes without saying, I think. I think that you will find, short of doing your job professionally and ethically, the department will defend your ability to do the job and will help you do the job as best they can. And that, again, has been true since the very, very early days, although the paper predates the department, so I guess it was on its own for the first semester or so. Each publisher or advisor establishes the consultation that they would expect or want or hope that the editors and students of the newspaper will engage in. It's important that you, and I think it's true, I have no reason to believe it's not true, Melissa would say it's true, that she's on your side. Okay, and that when you come to her with something, as students would come to me and say, you know, I don't know what to do about this. You think you can do this? Is this a good idea? Or how do I do this? I know it's here. How do I get this information? That her response, much like mine, was not, oh my God, what are you doing? Don't do that. We can't do that about the university. That was never the response. Now I can't do that anymore because, of course, now I'm an administrator. I have to behave myself. But in those days, it was my great choice. Oh, good, get him, get him. And we'll tell you some of the stories where we got them. But for the most part, it only works if the publisher can rely on the fact that you will talk to her when you have doubts. In the 10 years I was publisher, I had two instances of quote-unquote censorship. Every semester the students, I shouldn't even tell your students this because they're going to want to do it now. Every semester the students put out either an April Fool's issue in spring or a turkey issue on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, and said the most outrageous, unbelievable things about everybody on the campus. It was great fun. It was the best read issue of every semester. And one year, in doing this, they had 2 associated student people they really didn't like, which should come as a real surprise to you, right? And these were administrators, these weren't students. And so in the piece they were writing, they had this whole thing about one of them bowing over to the other one who was going to kick him in the butt. They didn't know the 2 of them were gay, and in fact were lovers. And I said, change the image. We're not going here. This is a really bad image for this. And they were fine with it. Without question, I required them to let me read the turkey issue and the April Fool's issue before it went to press. It's the only time I ever read the newspaper before publication, because it was a real concern to me when we're not being professional, how bad we could be without really saying or really hurting people. You know, administrators can take it, but I read that one every time. The other instance, the only other time I pulled anything from a newspaper was a cartoon one of our cartoonists did, and he went after one of his faculty members in cinema television arts, a professor named John Schultheis, who he called Shoeties. And he did this long thing about how boring and pedantic and everything it was. And I was wandering through the back shop. You don't even paste up anymore. You don't even have a back shop. I was wandering through the back shop looking at something, and I said, whoa, now this is really libelous. And he said, no, John would be okay with this. I said, take it up, go find him, have him sign the back. That this is not a problem with him. Never saw the cartoon again. Okay? We would have been sued for libel. It was absolutely both vicious and libelous. And clearly, John I don't think John ever knew about it, so if you know John, don't tell him that story. It is one of the few newspapers, the Daily Sundial, that continues to be part of a program or school of journalism. Most of the departments of journalism in the United States have given up the newspapers because, frankly, it is very, very tough on the department. It is very tough on the funding of the department. And while the department has almost no control over what the content of the newspaper is, they are the ones who get sued. And they are the ones who have to defend the students. And so there are very few student newspapers that are still part of a department or a school of journalism in the United States. Most of them gave them up in the 60s and the 70s. So did the Department of Journalism here. They gave the paper to the Associated Students. You see a problem with that? And the problem was the Associated Students, when they didn't like what the student newspaper reported, just wouldn't pay the bills of the paper and wouldn't give the editors the stipend. And somewhere in this, deep into this little tiny slideshow, there is a picture of a one-page. And it says, no news is not always good news. And it is a completely blank sundial they printed, with only this little note on the front page saying the Associated Students are refusing to pay our salaries, so we're not publishing a newspaper. And so it was a one day, and they healed the breach. In about there it is, no news is not good news. 1972, 73, I think. In about 75, the administration asked the department to take the paper back. There were rules that were set up under the circumstances, and the reason the administration asked that paper come back is that Glendale College of Law, and I don't even know if that still exists, sued the newspaper for libel and won. And it was a $5 million judgment. In 1974, that was a lot of money. And so the university said, well, you know, they really do need faculty to work with. And so it came back to the department. As part of the department, it is still an independent newspaper. You have First Amendment rights, student rights. Do you guys know about, well, you might know about the Student Press Association in Washington, D.C., who defend students when government or even their own universities come at them and try to limit what they do in terms of, and I'm sure somewhere in the newsroom you have that telephone numbers somewhere. Another part of what you should know, to my knowledge, the Sundial has never missed a publication day when there were going to be students on campus the next day. Earthquake being questionable, because what was the point of publishing a newspaper? There were going to be nobody here for 3 weeks. The fact is, the day that students came back to campus, there was a sundial, and if you go into the bound volumes, you will see it looks like the Daily Bruin. And it looks like the Daily Bruin because it was published in the Daily Bruin's back shop. There are two like that. There was one, it was a big blackout on campus when I was publisher, and they put the paper together at the Bruin back shop and from midnight to 2 a.m. after the Bruin went to bed, and got it distributed on campus. So it looks, the nameplate looks like the Bruin nameplate, it all looks like the Bruin. And there's one Bruin from the 80s that looks exactly like the Daily Sundial because they had a major blackout and came to our campus. It is a point of honor, as I suspect you will discover in your time here, that it's a real newspaper. It's a real newspaper, and there's a real obligation, and there is a real excitement and fun about, okay, let's find a barn and put out a newspaper. And so everybody takes everything up. Now it's all done computerized. It will probably take you nothing to do. In those days, it meant moving, at one point, typewriters across the city and piling everything into automobiles and going across and getting it printed and then driving it to the printer. Where is the printer these days? And do we electronically send it there? Yeah, okay. Whole different world. But the concept is the same. There's never been a missed date of publication, to my knowledge, of the student newspaper, despite fire, flood, earthquake, electrical outages, and all those kinds of things. There are hundreds of distinguished journalists working all over the United States, many for newspapers, or have worked. At least 50 at the LA Times in the last 50 years, starting with the very first editor of the Sundial. Anybody know who that was? probably even know who he is. His name is Bob Hilburn. He was, I used to refer to him as the aging rock critic of the Los Angeles Times. He is now the retired aging rock critic of the Los Angeles Times. But he was the editor, in alternate semesters, the editor of Sundial and the AS president. No one saw that as a conflict of interest in those days. Can't quite figure out why. Graduated, went to the Times and spent probably 30 years there as working for the LA Times. How many at the Daily News over the years? Maybe 50 also?
At least. I think I had at one point almost 20% of the staff were Sundilers.
Yeah. And it is. They're photographers, and they're copy editors, and they're reporters, and they're editors, and that's true of other papers around the country. There are sports reporters. There are huge numbers of people who are on TV who were former Sundial people. Seeing this large room full of people, I can't imagine you're all looking for jobs in newspapers. I would find that astonishing, and if I thought it was true, I'd be jumping up and down with glee and wondering what you're thinking. I'm assuming that these are either magazines, internet, something. Where do you all want jobs in journalism, in newspapers? No. Yes. Good. Yes. May we all pray that there are newspapers to go to when you were ready to have those jobs. So there are distinguished people who have graduated from this program, scattered all over the United States, and so you join a large core of people with great fond memories, with the exception of the late 80s, early 90s, where nobody liked this university. There were no classes, all sorts of stuff was going on. But for the most part, people who were on the Sundial, people who were in the Department of Journalism, loved the experience. We probably have the most complete alumni list of any department in the university because they stay in touch. And it really is fun. Every 25 years or so, we do a reunion, and we get to see all these old coots coming back, including me and my husband, who was the 1967 editor of the Daily Sundial. In one of the bound issues, you can look back and you can see there is a picture of him that semester, that year. The paper won Outstanding Student Newspaper in the state of California. And there is this wonderful picture of a very young Ronald Reagan shaking my very young husband's hands. The one who looks like Howdy Doody is my husband. And when I tell my husband that, and their pictures are all over the department, you'll come across it one of these days. And when I told my husband that, and he said, "What's the reflection on you? You married me a year later." So apparently I thought Howdy Doody was cute. So he was on there are all sorts of people who have gone on to distinguished careers. A little about the early years. Go to the beginning, back. Is this the first one? Okay, there it is. This is the first issue of the student newspaper. You will note it has no name. It has a question mark. There was also no campus here. This was, when this started, there was no Department of Journalism. This place, and it didn't look like this, as you may well imagine, was a branch campus of Los Angeles State College. CSU, Cal State Los Angeles, as we know it now. And it says San Fernando Valley campus of Los Angeles State College in the nameplate. And the help up there says, please help us name this publication. No one did. Give me another one, you'll see it again. What's in a name? And then I think the third one is the name. Nobody wanted to name it, so they named it themselves. And they named it the State Standard. This was still 1957. This is the first, Ben Rood is the first Associated Students president, so it must have been Hilburn who was editor in this semester, because they would switch back and forth. There were, I believe, 3,000 students. And a year later, in 1958, it became the Sundial. It was first the State Sundial and then the Sundial, and it became San Fernando Valley State College. Anybody want to guess why this is called the Sundial? Nobody? Venture a guess?
Hot in the valley.
Hot in the valley? Could be. None of you want to say it's because it's Cal State University, Northridge, CSUN? It's not.
Well, it wasn't CSUN back then.
No, it's right. It wasn't CSUN back then. Most people can say, oh, of course it's Sundial. It was CSUN. In fact, for some reason we don't understand, somebody gave the campus a sundial. And it stood in front of what was then the Student Center, which was, I don't know, a trailer somewhere on campus. It has since disappeared, that sundial, but it was named for the sundial, and it was San Fernando Valley State College. It became Cal State University Northridge in 1974 or 75?
I think it's 1972.
72, excellent, thank you. I'll show you how long I've been here. And clearly the name sundial fit even better, and so it became eventually the Daily Sundial. But that is that hand-lettered nameplate always catches my eye. Really? We thought that was good looking? Just really, really not an attractive look to it. Talked about Bob Hilburn being one of the first editors. Interestingly enough, one of the I don't know what else is on there. Why don't you flip through it and see? Another one with a shadow because it was a sundial. I just thought, oh, this is really very amusing. Hilburn. And that was Erlinson, it says in the corner, was the first department chair and the first advisor to the student newspaper. And then there's some next picture, I think, is a picture of the staff. Another one is with typewriters. Classroom with typewriters, another one. Okay, typewriters. And we don't have any of the Miss Flashbulb pictures in here. There's just some really odd stuff that they did. I wasn't here. I was a child living in New York during these days. Actually, I was in my second year of college in 1965. Just don't like anybody to know that. But there are the typewriters. We had typewriters, then we had electric typewriters, and then we had all sorts of series of ways. This is clearly a classroom, not the sundial newsroom. First sundial newsroom was in a building that doesn't exist. It fell down in the earthquake. It was the art building, which is where this Manzanita Hall now stands, was an art complex, and there was a ceramics room, and the Daily Sundial had a corner of the place where the kilns were in the ceramics room. That was the first sundial newsroom when it was still a weekly newspaper. So one of the issues that I said I would talk about was the tradition of being independent and investigative. And I wish I could say this dates back to this moment in time where this happened, and it's been that way ever since. Fact of the matter is, I don't know where that tradition comes from other than being a tradition of journalism, but my guess is it comes from the 60s, where everything was chaotic and everything was independent, and the student newspaper covered the series of demonstrations and takeovers that happened on this campus. Do you show Storm Over Valley State? There is a film about those years that was made by a graduate student probably 15, 18 years ago. I know the library has it. It's called Storm Over Valley State. And it talks about the Black Student Union taking over the administration building following a incident where the football coach either kicked or hit one of the black football players. And that escalated quickly because there were virtually no students of color on this campus at that time. And it escalated into, we need more students of color. We need started out with a Pan-African Studies department, and eventually then to Chicano Studies, Asian American Studies, now Central American Studies. But it all started with this football coach. He was football coach and he was also director of athletics, which presumably was the same thing. How much athletics did we have then? And the takeover for several days of the administration building and the arrests of students. Followed not too long after that by the anti-war demonstrations on campus. I know this campus looks like a large, slow, lethargic, uninterested place. It was probably the second hottest place to be in terms of anti-war protests in the 60s, the number one place being, well, Berkeley and San Francisco State. And so there are many pictures, and again, in the Sundial and other places, of demonstrations, and if you know the student reporters, you can see them running, you can see the pictures of them covering this, and certainly they covered it all, and many of them were arrested. And so it's an interesting background of being independent, of covering the news, and of being investigative, started, I think, in those years. Also during that time, they had the first, may have been one of the first in the United States, it was called a Third World page, which sounds very quaint now, but at the time it was an agreement that, I believe it was twice a week, in the Student Daily, there would be a page edited by and for students of color, talking about issues for students of color on this campus. And its first editor, if I remember correctly, was Frank Del Olmo, who then went on to be an editor at the Los Angeles Times and died very, very young, about 6 or 7 years ago. But Frank was one of the godfathers of Latino journalism in Southern California. And that same sense also led to, many years later, the black student newspaper that was published through the department called Nguzo Saba. And that was not a page, it was a freestanding newspaper. It was put together in the Sundial back shop. It was printed by the Sundial printer. And that lasted, I think, for 3 or 4 years. The woman who started it is now working for public relations on the campus. Her name is Shante Morgan. And she and I had lunch recently. She was one of my students. Had lunch recently. We were reminiscing over those days when, you know, we just said, sure, go ahead and do it. Which is actually often what the department does, provided we can afford it. I'm not we anymore, provided it can afford to do it. How does this get transmitted? Well, because this semester's students are next semester's editors, I guess you catch the fervor and you begin to understand how important it is. This fall, oh, wait, that's last semester. Okay, good picture, thank you. And will be hung, I assume, on the wall with all the others, if it's not already. And so I assume the editors for this semester are somewhere in that mass of people. And so it gets passed on. I used to tell the editors for me that they were not allowed to leave the newsroom for the final time unless there was somebody replacing them. He said, you will be chained to your desk till you find your replacement and help that person learn to do the job. We never had to actually chain them. But, you know, it does, you know, spotting good talent and saying, hey, you know, I think you could do this job becomes an important part of the process, and that encouragement, I assume many of you will want to be, those of you who aren't already editors, will want to be next semester's editors, and so on, and so on, and so on. And so it's a kind of tradition that gets passed along. Well, let me tell you then about some of the stories that we covered. These are mostly from the 10 years that I was publisher. You could have picked any 10 years and would have found similar kinds of stories. I just happened to have my bound volumes, and so I went through them trying to remember what it was. This is when I was publisher, and I will tell you, rest assured, that the administration would have been much happier had these stories not been done. There are people on campus who still remember the stories, not the current, you know, president and vice presidents, but clearly faculty have been here, who have been here for many, many years. We had a professor who had his students selling raffle tickets to a charity that he supported, and the kid who sold the most raffle tickets got an A. Sundial broke the story, and this is, I'm telling you these because Sundial broke these stories, which is what is the great fun of all of this. This isn't someone where, you know, Sundial reported the story, but actually heard the story and found out about it and did it. And the professor was suspended, I think, for a year. And promised to never do it again, and that was a fun story. Another fun story. There was always a what's the word? Antagonism. That's too strong. Between the Sundial and fraternities on campus. I assume, does that still exist, or that's not so anymore? A lot of fraternity members here. Okay, you're allowed. No one, you know, they're not actually banned from the newsroom, but they're always. And the fraternities. Reading the Sundial, my guess fraternities are a lot calmer than they were in those years, but fraternities, particularly the Pikes, are you a Pike? Am I getting myself in big trouble? Okay. Do the Pikes even exist anymore? Yeah. Okay. Pikes always seem to be getting in trouble. And if you pass this around, you'll see that this is a series of stories. If you look at where not the check that I had to hold on to, where these little things are, is a series of stories about hijinks from Pikes. Here you go. One of them is they trashed a whole bunch of condos in Mammoth, but the big story was that the Pikes were caught, go back a minute, arena registration. Your parents might know what arena registration was. You didn't go online. You went into a giant room and you walked up to a table and said, I'd like a card for such and such a class, and they would hand you a IBM punch card, oblong card with little holes in it, and you'd gather all these up, and then at the end you'd feed them into a computer and it would give you your schedule. Well, much like now, the time you're assigned to register depends on whether classes are going to be open. The Pikes would volunteer to work the tables, stand behind the tables and hand the professors their cards, and then they would steal the most important cards, hold them under the table. When their fraternity brothers would come, they would pass them out. They would reach under the table and pass out these cards. And Sundial discovered the scam, and the current director of admissions and records, Eric Forbes, and I joke about this all the time, because when the two reporters came to me and said, "You got to hear what's going on," and so I followed them downstairs to look, and there is Eric Forbes, who was then a junior person in admissions and records, leaning against a tree like this, watching what's going on. And we broke the story, and it was the big story about the Pikes one more time doing something incredibly evil. Now, they weren't always evil. Another fun story was what we called the Voodoo Dean. This one made national headlines all over. It was wound up on the Today Show. It wound up in national newspapers. The then Dean of Students, a man named Ed Peckham, was the one who would have to have hearings when students did something wrong. He would have a hearing, and they would determine the right or wrong of it. And one of his assistants would go into his conference room beforehand and do an Indian purification ceremony in his conference room to create good vibes for the student. He found this out and fired her, and she came to the Sundial. And we did the story about being fired because she was trying to be helpful for students and doing this cleansing ritual. It involved burning incense and a feather and saying a chant. And it was a national story. It helped us, of course, that we really couldn't stand him. So, I mean, including me. So it was great fun. And my favorite cartoon, somewhere in all of my bound volumes, there was an editorial cartoon of this young woman, assistant of his, tied to a stake, being burned by fire with Dean Peckham, who was very distinguished, had very gray hair, and he always wore a turtleneck and drove this giant convertible Cadillac, dancing around the fire, yelling "Burn, baby, burn" in his turtleneck with the car next to him and the whole thing. He never actually liked me after that. Less fun story, one that really troubled a lot of people. We had several professors in the department that shall remain nameless who engaged in sexual hijinks of the most distasteful kind, as in flashing each other, as in masturbating in front of each other. And someone came to us and told us the story, and the Sundial did the story, and the young woman who did the story, Valerie Kuklensky, who you know, she was managing editor of the Sundial at the time, and she did the story for probably the better part of a year. Finally, she came to me, "I can't stand this anymore. It's disgusting. These people are just repulsive." "It's almost over, Val. Keep going, you'll be fine." The fellow in this case was, in fact, suspended from teaching. I thought he should have been canned from the university, but he wasn't. But he had a year's suspension from teaching and is currently working in the university. I don't think he does it. He doesn't do it anymore. If he does, you guys aren't catching him at it. I don't know which it is. One of the good stories, things called PCBs, which are a toxic chemical that are in transformers. I think most of them are out of transformers now. Sierra Hall, which was then Sierra South, had a leak. The administration knew about it, did nothing about it for multiple years. Sundial broke the story, and it made local news, and they came out and interviewed everybody, and that was a great deal of fun for the students. And then one that I came across in flipping through all of this, we did a double truck, the double front inside pages, called an A for a Lay. And it was about faculty sleeping with students for grades. Well, actually, it's the other way around. It's students sleeping with faculty for grades. It's the students get the grades, the faculty get the lay, as it were. Yeah. And so those are the kinds of things, and as I said, while administrators may have gone, when they saw these things, they never tried to either stop. And the key was, of course, that the Sundial reporters pinned the story down. They had the information, they had the facts, they had the corroboration, they had the multiple sources. And interestingly enough, when you get that reputation, people start coming to you and telling you this stuff. Hey, did you hear what's going on over in the so-and-so department? And that makes it a little bit easier, provided that you understand that person's coming to you for a reason and has an agenda, and perhaps they may not be telling you the truth, but it's a hell of a tip. And so some of the tips. More of the fun stories we covered, and I'll go over these quickly. This is not fun, but it was an interesting story. For many years, the campus was very quiet, but we had an anti-apartheid protest where students took over the administration building with permission, which I thought was really very amusing. And they stayed in it from 5 o'clock one night till 7 o'clock the next morning when there was nobody there. Commencement at the Hollywood Bowl, the #1 silliest story that ever happened. They announced they were going to have a sunrise commencement at the Hollywood Bowl because we'd gotten too big for one commencement. This is before there were 8. And the editor called and told me that, and I said, no, that's a joke. And he said, no, Cynthia, it's not a joke. I said, call Caltrans and find out what's going to happen to freeways if we do this. And we wrote the story. They didn't believe it. Caused SIG alerts on 6 freeways at 7 o'clock in the morning, getting to the Hollywood Bowl. The president of the university couldn't get there. It was Jim Cleary. They eventually let him out of his car at the side of the 101, and he walked, the Hollywood Freeway, 170, and he walked up to the Hollywood Bowl. It was 2 hours late in doing it. It was the most heinous example. Students still haven't forgiven the university for ruining their graduation in that way. The following year, it broke it down to 8 graduations, which was the genesis of that. Streaking, you know what streaking is? When people run around naked doing things? We had a mass streaking on campus. We had about 30 people all get naked and run through the quad. And I canceled my class and took them out there. I wasn't even an advisor at that time. I was just a junior faculty member. I said, okay, we're going to go watch the streakers. So we went out and we watched the streaker. It was great fun. There's a front page somewhere of them all running naked across the front page of the Sundial. There was a sit-in because a young faculty member in art asked his class, freshman class, to draw nude pictures of themselves, not of others. And somebody's mother went nuts and called the university. The university suspended him or fired him, I can't remember. So they actually did take over the administration building with a Sundial reporter. I'm sitting in my office and the phone rings and it says, I don't know who it was, hi, I'm in here, they've taken over the conference room, the president's conference room, I'm in here with them and I'm going to cover the story, but we're hungry, could you send in pizzas? No, I can't, feel free to go hungry and cover the story. This is not a party, this is a story you're covering. Incredibly sad and painful ones. A student killed his professor and then himself over a grade. This was an international student who was going to be sent home. And it would have been in disgrace, and he begged the professor. It was, I don't know, from a C to a B or whatever it was. Professor said no. He pulled out a gun and shot and killed him in the stairwell right here in the Sierra Tower. And then killed himself. When, did you say? Probably early 90s. Probably early 90s, I don't remember. 2 suicides of people who jumped off Sierra Tower to their deaths. So public suicides within 18 months of each other. This was happened and then it happened again. My understanding, it can't be done anymore. One, the doors are locked up there, but there's also now wiring around the top of the place. A lesbian love triangle between the women's tennis coach and 2 of her tennis players, which ended in murdering two of them. I believe were killed by the 3rd one. I don't remember the details of that one. Campus police shooting, killing a car thief on campus who was stealing a truck, and that was a very painful lesson for our students because that was in fact the night before. This was the turkey issue. That was going to be for Wednesday morning. It was Tuesday night, and they had planned this whole joke issue, and now they had a serious crime on campus and didn't know what to do about it, and we concluded that we could do a flip page. Front page would be a serious paper about what happened, and if you turned it over, it would be the joke issue. Couple of questions I'm going to throw at you, and this is just about ethical stuff because that was my favorite thing ever to teach, was about ethics. Even when I became an administrator, both department chair and associate dean, I continued to teach my journalism ethics class because it was the most fun class to teach. So here's a couple of the questions. When you send a brand new freshman photographer out to the noon do we still do noon concerts? We do noon concerts, right? In the student union. Out to the cover of the noon concert, and she, brand new, has never shot before, and she's sitting right in front of the stage, and the lead singer drops his pants and performs the last song naked. And she just shoots, and she's shooting from 4 inches away. I mean, she's really close to this guy. And as all photographers are supposed to, you keep shooting. May not use the photo, but at least you have the photo if you need it. So we have gazillion pictures of the naked rock singer. What do you do with the picture? Does it go on the front page of the newspaper? Do you crop it judiciously? Do you do full frontal nudity? What the decision was, and I was involved in it, I asked them that they not put an entire penis hanging out on the front page, but that they crop it just at the top, and that inside they could do full frontal nudity, which is what they did. And the LA Times called and said, we want a copy of that picture because we're going to do a story on it in the LA Times. And I thought to myself, you got to be kidding me. They're not running nudity. So what they did, they sent this young woman, we had her send photos, and they took one of him dressed. They ran a photo of the singer dressed in pants, and with a note saying, moments later, he dropped his pants. What kind of picture is that to do? So we thought that was very, very amusing. But, you know, that's a conversation we had. We made a decision. The first issue of the semester was mailed home to every one of that time 25,000 students' homes, and the editor for the was a fall issue did make the entire front page of the Sundial a condom machine. It was the first condom machine installed in the university, and so all of these young mothers, these mothers were going to get pictures of their children. What's the first thing they see is a giant condom machine on the front page of the student newspaper. I got him to at least make it 3/4 of the page and put some reefers about other stuff that would be inside. That was a conversation we had. When you arrive at the scene of a leaper, someone who jumps to his death committing suicide, what photos do you shoot? That one came to actually a fist fight between the editor and the photographer. The photographer wanted to show what had happened. The editor was completely opposed to it. I had already gone home for the day. They called me. I came back. We had a conversation. I'm not sure they ever spoke to each other after that, but the picture that they wound up running was a picture shot from the top of the building down. So you had the sense of what it meant to make that jump, but it didn't show a close-up of the body. And again, this was all students' decisions talking it out. University president Jim Cleary used to give confidences to the editor. They would meet with the editor once a week, once every 2 weeks. They don't do that anymore, but he would sit and talk to the editor for half an hour, and he would say things like, and you know, they've been getting real drunk at graduations, that's why we're not doing it at night anymore. And by the way, that's off the record. And would freeze the student reporter from doing anything with it. And they'd come back and they'd tell me this, and I'd say, you gotta tell him it's not off the record. And the first time he does it, you have to say, excuse me, sir. If you want something off the record, you say so first. I agree or I don't agree, and then we go from there. And none of them would do it. They were all afraid because they all believed, and this is not true, that administrators will change your grades and flunk you out of the university for doing bad things to them. It's never happened. Finally, one editor who now works on the campus said, I don't care what they do to me, I'm going to do it. So the first time he did it, she walked in, he said it, and she said, I'm sorry, President Cleary. This is real important stuff you're telling me. I'd like to use it for the paper. So if you want me not to use it, you have to, and he backed off. And he went on the record, and we had a great story about lots of different things. So you've got to be nice about it. And, oh, you son of a bitch, but you can get people to think about what they're doing and to make them convinced that they are that you're a real reporter. The last story, and I'll let you go because I said I would be out of here before 12, and you may have some questions. The state of California, we shot pictures, and again, they're in one of the bound volumes, of a young man who wound up having a very unusual epileptic seizure on the roof. It was a cafeteria on the 4th floor of Sierra. And police were called, and he was violent, hitting people, throwing chairs. They wrestled him down, they wrestled him to the ground, they got him between the two buildings, between Richfield and Sierra, wrestled him to the ground, and Sundial shooting pictures of all of this. And ran a picture. It turns out that the young man was having this seizure, and he, at the time, the next day in the hospital, said, I don't blame the cops that were doing what they were supposed to do. And a week later, he filed suit against the state of California for undue violence and restraining him. So obviously, somebody got to him in between the two conversations. And immediately, the state of California said, we need the unpublished photos you shot, because in the crowd are people who we would use as witnesses to show that we were not using undue violence. We want these to testify. Newspapers do not give anybody their unpublished photos. And so the decision was made. Now, the students clearly said, we're not going to do we're not going to give them in. But it wasn't really the students don't own the photos. Sundial did. Department and I agreed that we would not turn over the photos. We went to one of the hotshot media attorneys in Los Angeles at that time. He wrote a letter. And the big joke was that I had the photos, so immediately I kept the photos. And so the issue was going to be I was going to wind up in jail. And that students would come and they'd have my nails done in the prison and all these various things, bring me cakes. And the story became public and the state of California backed off. But at the time when it was happening and before it became public, the then department chair came to me and he said, look, you're an untenured faculty member. You are holding dangerous stuff and you are crossing your own boss. It's not like the LA Times can tell the state of California to go to hell. They can. I work for the state of California. He said, you're putting yourself in an insane position. I'm tenured, department chair. Give me the photos and I will hold them for you. And we won't turn them over, but at least you are now free of having this onus on you. And I looked at him and I said, first of all, we tell students to stand up for their rights and to do what's right. I can't now say, okay, yeah, you stand up for what's right, but I'm going to make the department chair stand up for me because I'm scared. So I said, I can't do that. I have to hold them. This makes me sound like a hero, but it's just the point of a story. And I said, besides which, I would like to think when it comes time for me to get tenure, they'll look at this and they'll say, she was wrong, she shouldn't have done it, but she stood up for what's right, and therefore she's okay. And he looked at me and said, are you out of your mind? What would make you think they would do that? But in fact, whether it ever came up when I went up for tenure 2 years later or not, it never had an impact on what I was, whether or not I got tenure. I got tenure, I became a full professor, and went from there. So, it's a long history. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you weren't all bored out of your mind. I'd be happy if you have a question or two and you're not dying to go to lunch this very instant. Be happy to respond to anything you have to say. Or you can just ride off into the sunset.
Nothing? Come on.
I think, what was your most memorable about being with the paper, as long as you had?
Without any question, the students. And the fun part of watching students, and some students would come in. Sharon Kaplan, who was a copy editor at the LA Times, at the Daily News, came in as a freshman. Well, we don't even let freshmen on the paper. She said, so I just want to hang out in the newsroom. I'll do anything. I'll answer phones. She was there for 4.5 years. She wound up becoming one of the editors. I still know her and I still see her. But it really was about watching young students grow and young students become kind of acclimated to the feel of what it meant to be in a newsroom and to have the excitement and to not care that at that time there till midnight getting the newspaper ready and then having somebody have to drive it to, I don't know where it was, San Fernando, I think it was where the printer was then. And that kind of working with students, helping them think through issues when they could come to me and say, how do we do this, or can we get away with this? And almost always I was able to find a way where they could do it in such a way that they could do what they were trying to do, but they'd have to pin the story down. So yes, you can do this, but you better well know what you're talking about, and we better have 11 sources from Thursday, because the university is not going to be happy about this. And it was great fun. My husband was an editor at the Times at the time, and one of my great joys was beating him on a story. And the Times never cared that the Sundial beat them on a story. That was never an issue. But for me, if it happened on our campus and the Times had it first, yeah, that was a sin. So, you not only do the story, but keep your mouth shut. Some of the students were working in internships at the Times. I don't want to hear you talking about it at the Times. This is our story. Let them read the paper in the morning, get the story, and do a catch-up the next day.
Your off-the-record dinners at home.
Oh yeah, that was part of it. I mean, we because we were in competition, in my point of view, we would go off the record at dinner at home. And my 3 children still believe that normal people have off-the-record dinners. This is off the record. I mean, so, and we did that for many, many years. It's nice to have someone who was in the same profession. But during that period of time was, I really, and he would hear about it. And I tell him about it. This is off the record. And I tell him, and I said, once we have it, I'll let you know, and they could follow it up. So those kinds of things. It was always about the students. It was always about those moments of intense excitement. I can visualize there was an earthquake that really damaged Cal State LA. And I can't remember how, it had to have been in that period of time, somewhere between 83 and 93, because I was in the newsroom. And big slabs of the side of the parking garage fell off and killed people. I just don't remember the details. And so we heard the story, and they were looking at the wire, the AP wire, and they looked at it, and 3 of them jumped up, started running out of the newsroom and said, "We're going to Cal State LA." And I can still see the young woman, I remember her name, the long blonde hair, leaping across a chair to get out the door, to get to her car, to get to Cal State LA to do the story. That was what was fun for me. Thank you all for having me. Melissa, thank you for inviting me. Have a great semester. And if you ever need to be filled in, I mean, I have a lot of information. I don't mean hidden information, but there's something about it you don't understand how it works. Some universities, how do we do disqualified students? What is a GPA? You can always call me or send me an email and I can give you information. I won't give you secret stuff, but I can always explain process to you. So thank you very much.